The skies turned blood-red over the great longhouse of Jarl Hrothgar, as a rare solar eclipse marked the birth of a child destined to change the fate of the 9 worlds. The skalds whispered of doom, and the infant prince was cast out to die in the frozen fjords. But fate had other plans. Saved by a lone shieldmaiden who defied her clan, the boy grew strong in the shadows of the northern woods, where Odin's ravens watched his every move. Now as he comes of age, ancient powers stir in his blood, powers that could either bring salvation or destruction to his people. But can one marked by darkness truly be the light that saves his realm from Ragnarök? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bronze drinking horn slipped from Jarl Hrothgar's trembling fingers, mead spilling across ancient floorboards as darkness crept across the sun. Within the great longhouse, shadows deepened unnaturally, and the flames of 100 torches dimmed to mere whispers. The air grew thick with the scent of sweet grass and burning herbs, while outside the clash of shield against shield rose in desperate rhythm, as if the warriors could beat back the darkness itself. "The child comes," whispered Grida, the eldest. Of the velour, her weathered hands steady as she prepared the birthing bed. Around her neck hung an ancient amulet, a bronze disc etched with runes of protection, now glowing with an inner fire that matched the Eclipse's corona. Astrid stood, guard at the door, her shield hand clenched tight around her sword hilt. As the Jarl's most trusted shieldmaiden, it was her duty to protect the birthing chamber, but something deeper stirred in her heart, a disquiet that had nothing to do with the warrior's desperate drumming. The first scream pierced the air, just as the last sliver of sun vanished. Through the smoke hole in the roof, Astrid glimpsed Odin's ravens circling, their black wings cutting through the blood-red light. The birth screams grew louder, and with them came a keening note that made even the hardened warriors outside fall silent. "It is time," Grida announced, her voice carrying the weight of ages. "The child of the Eclipse approaches." Jarl Hrothgar paced like a caged wolf, his great beard matted with spilled mead. "This is wrong," he muttered. "No child should be born when the sun hides its face. The old tales speak. The old tales speak of many things, my Jarl." Grida cut in, her eyes sharp as winter frost. "Not all darkness heralds doom." But even as she spoke these words, the birthing room erupted in chaos. Queen Sigrid's final push brought forth not just the child, but a burst of shadow that extinguished every torch in the longhouse. In the absolute darkness that followed, only the Eclipse's bloody light through the smoke hole illuminated the scene. The child did not cry. Instead, in the silence that followed, the infant opened eyes that reflected the corona's fire, and shadows seemed to dance around his tiny form. The volur gasped and stepped back, making signs against evil. Even Grida's ancient hands trembled as she clutched her glowing amulet. "Dark sorcery," one of the younger volur whispered. "The child bears Loki's mark." Hrothgar stormed forward, his face twisted in grief and rage. "No son of mine shall bring doom upon this house." His hands reached for the silent infant, but Astrid was faster. In one fluid motion, she stepped between the Jarl and his child. "My lord," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "let us consult the skalds before—" "The skalds?" Hrothgar laughed bitterly. "Look around you, shieldmaiden. What more omens do you need? No, this thing is not my son. It cannot be." The skalds were summoned anyway, their ancient voices rising in songs of prophecy as the eclipse slowly passed. They spoke of Ragnarök, of a child born between light and shadow, of doom and salvation intertwined. But Hrothgar heard only what he feared most: destruction, the end of his line, the fall of all he had built. The decree, when it came, fell like an axe blade. The child would be exposed on the fjord's frozen shores, as was the ancient way with cursed births. None dared speak against the Jarl's word, none except Astrid, who stood silent guard as the plans were made, her mind already racing ahead to what must be done. Around her neck, hidden beneath her cloak, Grida's amulet pulsed with a warm light. The Volure's silent blessing passed to her in a moment of shared understanding. The child of the Eclipse would not die this night, not if she had any say in the matter. The night wind howled like 1,000 hungry wolves as Astrid traced the well-worn path to the fjord. Snow stung her face, but she kept her head high, watching. The ravens that had followed her from the longhouse, their wings caught moonlight like shards of obsidian, and their presence gave her strength. Beneath her heavy cloak, the infant slept peacefully, warmed by furs and the gentle glow of Grida's amulet. The bronze disc pulsed with each of the child's heartbeats, as if their fates were already intertwined. Behind her, 2 sets of footprints marked the snow, hers, and those of the young warrior tasked with witnessing the exposure. He walked with his head bowed, either in prayer or shame. "We're far enough," the warrior said at last, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "The gods will take him now." He gestured to a flat stone that jutted from the snow like an altar. Astrid's hand tightened on her sword hilt. "The gods are already here," she said softly, glancing at the ravens, "but not to take him." The warrior followed her gaze upward and paled. Everyone knew Odin's ravens when they saw them. His hand moved toward his own weapon, uncertainty clear in his stance. "Shieldmaiden, what are you?" Her blade sang as it cleared its scabbard. "Make your choice now, Bjorn. Walk back to the longhouse and tell them you saw me leave the child, or stay and fight and let your blood stain this snow." Bjorn was young, but not foolish. He had seen Astrid train the Jarl's warriors, had witnessed her skill in a dozen raids. His hand fell away from his sword. "The Jarl will hunt you," he warned, "both of you. Let him try." Astrid's smile was wolf-fierce in the moonlight. "I've already chosen my path." As if in response to her words, one of the ravens swooped low, dropping something that glinted as it fell. Astrid caught it with her free hand, a single black feather, its edge sharp as a blade and marked with runes that seemed to shift in the darkness. Bjorn took several steps backward, making the sign against evil. "The gods have marked you both now," he whispered. "I want no part of this." He turned and fled, his footsteps quickly swallowed by the howling wind. Astrid waited until he was gone before checking the child again. The boy's eyes were open now, reflecting the starlight like pools of midnight water. No normal infant could have survived this cold so quietly, she knew. But then, this was no normal infant. "Well, little wolf," she murmured, tucking the raven feather into the furs beside him, "it seems Odin himself has taken interest in your fate. Shall we see where this path leads?" The child's only response was to grasp the feather with a tiny fist, but in that moment, the storm around them calmed, as if nature itself held its breath. Above, the ravens wheeled once more and then flew north, toward the ancient forests where the old magic still held sway. Astrid adjusted her shield across her back and checked her sword belt one final time. She had prepared for this moment since the first signs of the eclipse, hiding supplies and planning routes through the wilderness. She knew paths the Jarl's men would never find, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin enough to slip through if one knew the way. The amulet's warmth intensified as she turned north following the raven's path. Its light seemed to push back the darkness, creating a small sphere of safety around them. Grida had pressed it into her hands just before she left, whispering ancient words of protection. "Guard him well," the Volva had said, her eyes distant with visions. "In his blood runs the power to either prevent Ragnarök or hasten its coming. Which path he chooses will depend much on you, Shieldmaiden." Now, taking her first steps into exile, Astrid felt the weight of that responsibility settle across her shoulders like a familiar cloak. She was no longer just a warrior sworn to protect her Jarl. She was now guardian to a child of prophecy, marked by both shadow and light. Above them, the aurora began to dance, great curtains of green and purple light rippling across the sky. The raven's calls echoed back through the night, guiding them toward whatever fate awaited. Astrid walked steadily onward, leaving behind everything she had known, carrying with her the future of the 9 worlds. 7 winters passed in the hidden valley Astrid had found, guided by Odin's ravens. Here, ancient pines grew so tall and thick their branches wove together overhead, creating a natural fortress that kept them safe from prying eyes. The boy she had named Sigurd, Victory Guardian, grew strong in these shadows, though he was anything but hidden. Again, Astrid commanded, raising her wooden training sword, "And mind your footwork this time." Sigurd adjusted his stance, his own practice blade, moving with unusual grace for a 7-year-old. The wooden sword had been his constant companion since he could walk. Astrid had carved it herself from a branch of lightning-struck oak, marking it with protective runes that glowed faintly in darkness. They circled each other in the clearing before their cottage, where years of practice had worn the earth smooth. Sigurd's eyes never left his foster mother's blade, tracking its movement with that uncanny focus that sometimes made even Astrid uneasy. No child should have such predator's eyes. He struck first, a combination of moves that would have impressed even the Jarl's weapons master. Astrid parried each blow, though with increasing difficulty. The boy was strong, stronger than any child. His age should be, and getting stronger with each passing season. "Better," she acknowledged, countering with a swift attack that should have caught him off guard. But Sigurd was already moving, as if he had seen the strike coming before she launched it. His wooden blade met hers with precise timing, and the impact shuddered up her arm. That's when she noticed the shadows. They moved wrong, stretching towards Sigurd like eager hounds, despite the sun being directly overhead. Around his free hand, darkness gathered like mist, and his eyes held that familiar eclipse fire glow. "Enough!" Astrid called, lowering her weapon. The shadows reluctantly retreated, and Sigurd's eyes returned to their normal deep blue. He looked disappointed, but she had learned early to stop these sessions when his power began to manifest. "I almost had you that time," he said, running a hand along his practice sword's worn surface. The runes flickered in response to his touch, as they always did. Astrid smiled, though concern tightened the corners of her eyes. "You're improving faster than I expected, perhaps too fast." She gestured for him to sit with her on a fallen log that served as their rest spot. Round his neck, Grida's amulet pulsed steadily. He had never taken it off since she had given it to him on his 5th naming day. "Tell me what you felt just then," she said quietly. "When the shadows came." Sigurd frowned, fingering the amulet. "It's like they want to help. The shadows, I mean. They whisper sometimes, showing me where the next strike will fall. Is that wrong?" "Not wrong," Astrid said carefully, "but dangerous. Power always is, especially power that comes unbidden." She touched the raven feather braided into his dark hair. It had never dulled or broken in all these years. "You bear gifts from both shadow and light, little wolf. Learning to balance them will be your greatest challenge." As if summoned by her words, a raven's harsh call split the air. Hugin, or perhaps Munin, Astrid could never tell them apart, landed on a nearby branch. These daily visits had become so routine that Sigurd barely glanced up, but Astrid never failed to acknowledge them with a respectful nod. They were not alone in watching the boy's development. "Mother," Sigurd said suddenly, using the private name he had given her years ago, "why do they watch me? The ravens, the shadows, even the trees seem to bend toward me sometimes. What am I?" Astrid's hand tightened on her practice sword. She had known this day would come, had prepared for it, yet the moment still felt too soon. "You are my son," she said first firmly, "but you are also something more, something that hasn't been seen in the 9 worlds for many ages." She told him then, as the afternoon light filtered through the ancient pines, about the eclipse that marked his birth, about Jarl Hrothgar's fear and the prophecies of the skalds. Throughout the tale, Sigurd sat unnaturally still, only his eyes moving as he processed each word. "So I truly am cursed," he said finally, looking down at his hands where shadows still sometimes danced between his fingers. "No," Astrid said, sharply. "You are chosen. There's a difference. The curse only comes if you let fear rule your gifts." She stood, raising her practice sword once more. "Now, shall we continue?" This time, try using your sight without calling the shadows. Power is like a blade, it serves best when controlled. Sigurd rose, his young face set with determination that made him look startlingly like his true father. As they resumed their positions, Astrid silently renewed her oath to protect him, to prepare him for whatever destiny the gods had woven. Above them, the ravens watched, and the ancient pines whispered their endless secrets. The vision came on midwinter's night, when the darkness was deepest and the veil between worlds thinnest. Sigurd had just turned 12, and the ancient fragment of runestone Astrid had found while gathering herbs sat heavy in his palm. Its rough surface bore half-formed symbols that seemed to shift in the firelight, telling fragments of stories. He almost understood. He hadn't meant to touch it. Astrid had warned him that old things held old memories, and some memories were too powerful for the unprepared mind. But something about the stone had called to him, like a voice, just beyond. Hearing, and now the world twisted. He stood beneath the great ash tree Yggdrasil, its vast branches stretching up through all 9 worlds. But something was wrong. The mighty trunk bled darkness from deep wounds, and its leaves whispered of coming doom. Around its roots, shadows, gathered like hungry wolves, wearing faces both familiar and strange. "The twilight comes," a voice spoke, and Sigurd turned to find a figure standing beside him. An old man in a worn traveller's cloak, one eye gleaming with ancient wisdom, the other hidden beneath a deep hood. "The question, young prince, is whether you will hasten it or prevent it." "I'm no prince," Sigurd answered, though his voice shook. He knew who this was, had heard enough of Astrid's tales to recognize Odin Allfather himself. "I'm just—" "You are what you choose to be," Odin interrupted, "but choose carefully. Power calls to power, and the shadows in your blood sing to the darkness gathering at the world's edges." He gestured to the bleeding tree. "Already the bonds weaken, already the old enemies stir." The scene shifted, and Sigurd saw armies clashing. Beneath a blood-red sky, he saw a great wolf breaking free of ancient chains, a serpent rising from the depths, a ship built from dead men's nails sailing on a sea of blood. Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, the end of all things. But then he saw something else, a figure standing between light and shadow, wielding both as naturally as Astrid wielded her sword. Power flowing like water, like wind, like the very force that held the 9 worlds together. A choice being made, a balance found, a new path opened where before there had been only endings. "Remember," Odin's voice faded as the vision began to break apart. "The eclipse marked you as both bane and blessing. Which proves true depends on—" "Sigurd!" Astrid's voice snapped him back to their cottage. He was on his knees, the runestone fragment burning cold in his grip, sweat freezing on his brow despite the hearth's warmth. His foster mother knelt beside him, her face tight with concern. "What did you see?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. The ravens were back, perched in the shadows of the roof beams, their eyes gleaming like stars. Slowly, carefully, Sigurd described the vision. As he spoke, the runestone symbols began to glow with a pale inner light, and new runes appeared alongside the old ones, runes that wrote themselves in script so ancient even Astrid couldn't read them. "It's happening faster than I feared," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Your power grows too quickly. We're running out of time." "Time for what?" Sigurd asked, but even as the words left his mouth he felt it, a disturbance in the shadows at the edge of their protected valley. Something had found them. Something was coming. Astrid was already moving, pulling wrapped bundles from hidden places around the cottage. "Time to prepare you properly. I had hoped for a few more years, but—" She pressed a real sword into his hands, steel folded and refolded by master smiths, its edge gleaming with deadliness that made his wooden practice blade seem suddenly childish. "The enemies your father feared have never stopped searching. Now they've found us, and you must be ready." Ready for what? To fight, to choose, to become what you were born to be. She checked her own weapons with practiced efficiency. "The vision was no accident, little wolf. Odin himself has marked you for a purpose. Now we must ensure you live long enough to fulfill it." Outside, wolf howls echoed through the winter night, too close, too hungry, too purposeful to be natural. Wolves. The shadows around them darkened and writhed, responding to Sigurd's rising anxiety. But for once, Astrid didn't tell him to control them. Instead, she smiled that fierce battle smile he knew from their training sessions. "Let them come," she said, quietly. "It's time they learned why the All-Father sent his ravens to watch over you. It's time they learned what we've been preparing for all these years." The runestone in Sigurd's hand pulsed once more, its new runes burning bright as starfire. As destiny itself began to unfold, they came with the storm, 6 berserkers wearing bear pelts crusted with ice, their eyes gleaming with battlefield madness, and something darker, a shadow taint that Sigurd could smell like rotting meat. Their war cries echoed through the valley, but the wolves that had heralded their arrival fell silent, as if waiting to see what would unfold. "Remember your training," Astrid murmured, standing shoulder to shoulder with him in the clearing before their cottage. "They're stronger than normal men, faster too. But berserkers sacrifice control for power. Use that against them." Sigurd nodded, his new sword steady in his grip. The shadows around him writhed eagerly, wanting to help, wanting to fight. But he remembered Odin's warning about choices, about balance. There had to be a middle path between rejecting his power and surrendering to it completely. The first berserker burst from the tree line with shocking speed, battle-axe raised high. He was massive, easily twice Sigurd's size, his beard matted with blood and frost. Behind him, his brothers spread out. In a hunting formation Sigurd recognized from Astrid's lessons, time seemed to slow. The shadows whispered of attacks not yet launched, of killing blows still forming in enemy minds. But instead of letting the darkness fight for him, Sigurd used it only to see, to know, to understand. He met the berserker's charge with a precision that shocked even Astrid. One moment the huge warrior was bearing down on him with unstoppable force. The next, Sigurd had stepped aside like water flowing around a rock, his blade finding the exact spot where the berserker's armor joined. The man's roar of rage turned to surprise as he stumbled, blood freezing on his skin in the winter air. He spun with incredible speed for someone his size, but Sigurd was already gone, moving through the shadows between heartbeats. "Witch child!" Another berserker snarled, pressing forward with his own attack. "Your head belongs to Jarl Hrothgar." Astrid met this one with a warrior's welcome, her shield catching his axe, even as her sword opened his throat. "My son," she growled, "belongs to no one." The battle descended into chaos. Snow churned red beneath their feet as Sigurd and Astrid fought back to back, their movements perfectly synchronized from years of practice. The berserkers were indeed incredibly strong, their blood madness making them nearly impossible to stop. But they fought like avalanches, all power, no precision. Sigurd's blade found another opening, another weakness. He wasn't stronger than these warriors, but he didn't need to be. The shadows showed him where they would strike before they moved, and his own movements flowed like dark water through the gaps in their defense. A berserker's axe whistled toward his head, too fast to dodge, too powerful to block, but the shadows had already warned him it was coming. Sigurd ducked and pivot-stepped inside the warrior's reach, his sword rising in a swift arc that caught the axe's handle just below the head. Steel met wood with a crack like thunder. The axe head went spinning away into the darkness, its runes flickering once before going dark. Its wielder stood frozen in shock, staring at the useless handle in his hands. He had just enough time to meet Sigurd's eyes to see the eclipse fire burning in them, before Astrid's blade found his heart. "3 down!" she called, her voice fierce with battle joy. 3 to... The warning came too late. A berserker's sword slipped past her guard, drawing a line of fire across her arm. Sigurd felt rather than saw her pain, and something inside him snapped. The shadows erupted. No longer content to merely whisper and guide, they surged forth like a tide of darkness, engulfing the remaining berserkers. The warriors screamed as their blood madness met something far older, far darker. Their own shadows turned against them, becoming solid as steel for heartbeats at a time, long enough to pierce armor, to crush bone, to stop hearts. When it was over, Sigurd stood panting in the sudden silence. Around him, the shadows reluctantly retreated, leaving behind broken bodies cooling in the snow. Only the broken axe head remained untouched, its runes now dead and dull. Sigurd, Astrid's voice was careful, measured. She stood very still, though her sword remained ready. "Come back to me, little wolf." He turned to her, and for a moment she saw something ancient and terrible in his eyes, something that had only been waiting for permission to emerge. But then he blinked, and he was just her boy again, looking shocked at what he had done. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I felt you get hurt, and I couldn't—" "Shh." She pulled him close with her good arm. "You protected us. That's what matters." But over his head, her eyes traced the patterns of dead shadows on the snow, and her face was troubled. "Though perhaps it's time we discussed exactly what else you can do with this power of yours." The broken axe head lay half-buried in bloodied snow, a trophy of his first real battle, and a reminder of how quickly power could turn the hunter into the hunted. The entrance to Nidavellir, the realm of the dwarves, opened in the heart of the mountain 3 nights after the berserker attack. Astrid had insisted they seek out the hidden folk, though she wouldn't say why. They followed a path only visible by starlight, marked by runes that glowed like trapped aurora. "Mind your manners," Astrid warned as they approached the stone arch that had appeared between one heartbeat and the next. "The dwarves remember both kindness and insult for 9 generations." Sigurd nodded, acutely aware of the broken axe head hanging at his belt. The shadows here felt different, older, deeper, filled with the memory of ancient forge fires and hammers that had shaped the world itself. His own shadows curled close to him, almost shy in the presence of such power. "Welcome, Eclipse-born." The voice emerged from the darkness before they saw its owner. A dwarf stepped into the light of their torch, his beard braided with strips of metal that chimed softly as he moved. His eyes were the color of heated steel, and they missed nothing. "I am Alvis, and we have been expecting you." More dwarves emerged from hidden passages, each carrying tools that might have been weapons or craft implements. With dwarven work, Sigurd knew, they were often both. One figure caught his attention, a female dwarf whose dark hair was streaked with silver, wearing an apron covered in mysterious stains. At her belt hung a knife that seemed to drink in the torchlight. "You've grown strong, Shadow Walker," she said, her voice like stone grinding on stone. "But strength without wisdom is a sword without a handle." She glanced at Astrid. "You were right to bring him now, Shieldmaiden. The time grows short." Astrid bowed deeply. "Thank you for seeing us, Mistress Gunlod. The ravens guided us to your door." "Odin's birds meddle as always," Alvis grumbled, but there was respect in his tone. "Come, there is much to discuss, and the forges are hot." They followed the dwarves through tunnels that twisted in ways that defied normal geometry. Sigurd felt the mountain's weight above them, but it wasn't frightening. If anything, it felt protective, like being wrapped in a blanket of stone and ancient magic. The forge room opened before them like a flower made of fire and shadow. Great bellows pumped with no visible operators, and the walls were lined with weapons and tools that hummed with contained power. But it was the central forge that drew all eyes, a pit of blue-white flame that burned without fuel. "Your father's men carried dwarf-forged weapons," Gunlod said, running her hands through the flames as if they were cool water. "But they were made in the time of his grandfather, when the alliance between our peoples was strong. Now they come to our doors with demands instead of respect, seeking weapons for their hunt." Her eyes fixed on Sigurd. "Their hunt for you. Then why help me?" Sigurd asked. The shadows whispered that there was more here than simple hospitality. Gunlod smiled, and it was like watching stone crack to reveal gems beneath. "Because you ask instead of demand. Because you stand between worlds as we do, neither fully of shadow nor fully of light, and because we remember." She drew the knife from her belt, and the air around it shimmered with possibility. This blade was forged in the heart of a dying star, quenched in the waters of Mimir's well and spelled with runes older than the 9 worlds themselves. It can cut through shadow as easily as flesh, and it never misses what its wielder truly seeks. She offered it to him, hilt first. It has waited 300 years for a hand worthy to hold it. The dagger seemed to sing as Sigurd grasped it, its weight perfect in his hand. The shadows around him reached for it curiously, then recoiled as the blade flared with inner light, both shadow and light like him, a tool for finding balance. "There will be a price," Alvis warned, but Gunnlod waved him to silence. "The price is already paid," she said, "in choices yet to come. Whether they are the right choices," she shrugged, "that is beyond even our sight to see." The forge fire cast their shadows on the walls, and Sigurd watched as his own shadow seemed to bow to those of the dwarves. These were the masters of craft and creation, who had forged some of the greatest treasures in all the 9 worlds. That they would help him, arm him, teach him. It meant something important. "Now," Gunnlod said, rolling up her sleeves, "shall we begin your real education, Eclipse child? There is much to learn, and as I said," her eyes met Astrid's, "time grows very short indeed." Spring came to the northern woods, but it brought no peace. Sigurd stood at the edge of a moonlit pool, watching as Gunnlod traced runes in the water with the tip of her dwarf-forged blade. Behind them, Astrid kept watch, her face grave in the silver light. They had spent 3 months with the dwarves, learning secrets of metal and magic, but tonight was different. Tonight was about blood. "Your mother lives," Gunnlod said suddenly, her voice cutting through the night's silence. The water runes flared blue, forming images that moved like smoke. Though Jarl Hrothgar would have his people believe otherwise, he keeps her in the high tower, claiming madness took her after losing her only child. Sigurd's hands clenched. The shadows around the pool writhed in response to his anger, but the dagger at his belt hummed a warning note. Balance. Always balance. "She is not alone," the dwarf continued, her steel-colored eyes reflecting the magical light. "Your twin sister, born moments after you, she lives as well." "Twin," Sigurd whispered. Even Astrid looked shocked at this revelation. "The eclipse mark touched you both, though differently. Where you command shadows, she walks in dreams." Hrothgar kept her existence secret, fearing the prophecy's power would be doubled in twins. Gunnlod reached into her apron and withdrew something that gleamed gold in the moonlight. "Your mother managed to send this out with a trusted servant before her imprisonment. It has taken many hands to bring it to you." The ring was heavy, for its size, made of gold so pure it seemed to glow from within. Runes of protection and power were carved into its surface, and at its center sat a stone that seemed to hold a star's heart. "The ring of your bloodline," Gunnlod explained, "worn by every true heir of the northern jarldoms since the first ships found these shores. Your mother wore it while carrying you and your sister. It knows your blood." Sigurd took the ring carefully. The moment it touched his skin, warmth flooded through him, and the starstone blazed to life. In its light, he saw flashes of memory that weren't his own. A woman with eyes like his own, singing ancient lullabies. A girl with midnight hair practicing, rune-casting in secret, a crown of twisted gold waiting in shadows. "The ring shows truth to those of the blood," Gunnlod said softly. "It will lead you to your kin if you let it, but be warned, such guidance comes with great risk. Others will sense its power when you wear it." "Let them," Sigurd said, and his voice held an echo of thunder. The ring slid onto his finger as if it had been made for him, and the shadows around him took on a golden edge. "I'm tired of hiding." "You're not ready," Astrid started, but Gunnlod raised a hand. "He is ready enough. The signs align, the ravens circle more frequently, the world tree trembles, and the old enemies gather their forces. If he does not act soon, his sister's gift of dreamwalking may drive her mad, as it did her grandmother before her. They must be united before the next eclipse." "The next eclipse?" Sigurd looked up sharply. "When?" 3 months hence," the dwarf said. "When the sun's crown once again graces the sky, choices must be made that will echo through all 9 worlds." She turned to Astrid. You have prepared him well, shieldmaiden, but now he must forge his own path. Blood calls to blood, and destiny will not be denied forever. Astrid's face showed a complex mix of emotions: pride, fear, resignation. Then, we'll need allies. The wolf clans still remember the old alliances, and there are those among the Jarls who question Hrothgar's rule. More than question, Gunnlod agreed. Already whispers spread of the Eclipse-born's return. Already the old prophecies are remembered. She faced Sigurd fully. But remember this, young prince. Prophecies show possibilities, not certainties. The power to shape your destiny lies in your choices, not in others' expectations. Sigurd nodded, turning the ring on his finger. Through it, he could feel distant heartbeats, his mother's quiet strength, his sister's fierce dreams. They were waiting, whether they knew it or not. The shadows gathered close, eager for action after so long in hiding, but the dagger's song kept them in check. Balance in all things. It's time, he said simply. Time to show my father that not all shadows can be banished by force. Time to remind him why the old ways deserve respect. He looked at Astrid, his voice softening. Time to free our people from fear. The ring pulsed once, as if in agreement, and overhead, Odin's ravens called out a challenge to the night. The hunt would soon begin again, but this time Sigurd would not be the prey. This time he would show the northern jarldoms why the eclipse was considered both an ending and a beginning. This time blood would indeed call to blood, and the shadows themselves would answer. The wolf clan's great hall rose from the misty forest like a ship breaching waves, its timber walls blackened by centuries of torch smoke. Above it flew their ancient banner, a snarling wolf's head on a field of midnight blue, bordered by runes of protection so old they had become part of the fabric itself. As Sigurd approached with Astrid at his side, the banner stirred in a wind that touched nothing else. The wolf clan remembers its oaths, Astrid murmured as they climbed the steps. When your grandfather united the jarldoms, they were his strongest supporters, until Hrothgar broke faith with the old ways. Inside, the hall was alive with shadow and firelight. 24 of the clan's warriors lined the walls, their wolf fur cloaks marking them as elite hunters. At the high seat sat Ulfr One-Eye, the clan chief who had earned his name fighting alongside Odin's Valkyries, or so the stories claimed. The old warrior studied Sigurd with his remaining eye, the other hidden behind a patch carved with protective runes. So, he rumbled, the Eclipse-born returns. His gaze flickered to the ring on Sigurd's finger, then to the dwarf-forged dagger at his belt. Bearing interesting gifts, I see. I come seeking allies, Sigurd said, letting a measure of his power seep into his voice. The shadows in the hall deepened slightly, and several warriors reached for weapons. Those who remember when the northern jarldoms stood united under rulers who respected both old ways and new. Ulfr's eye narrowed. Pretty words from one who commands shadows. Why should we trust the very power our songs warn against? Sigurd smiled and drew the dagger. Several warriors stepped forward, but he simply held it up to catch the firelight. Because I also carry this, a blade of light to balance the darkness. Because I seek not to conquer, but to restore. He met the clan chief's gaze steadily. And because you've been waiting for this moment since the day you heard of my birth. A low murmur ran through the hall. Ulfr leaned forward, suddenly intent. Explain. Your banner carries the oldest runes of any clan, Sigurd said, gesturing. To the wolf-head standard, runes that speak of balance, of walking between worlds. The wolf clan has always stood at the boundary between light and shadow, just as wolves themselves hunt in both day and night. He took a step forward. You knew what my birth meant. You've been preparing for my return. Ulfr's weathered face broke into a fierce grin. Astrid, he called, you've taught him well. He stood, his massive frame casting long shadows in the firelight. You speak truth, Eclipse-born. We have waited, and we have watched as Hrothgar's fear poisoned the jarldoms, watched as he turned away from wisdom in favor of power. The clan chief descended from his high seat, each step deliberate. "But before we pledge our axes to your cause, you must prove yourself to the clan." He gestured, and warriors brought forth an ancient chest bound in iron. "Our banner has flown over wolf hunters for 15 generations. If you would claim our allegiance, you must first claim the banner, by proving you understand what it truly means to walk between worlds." From the chest, he drew a ceremonial knife made of black iron. "Your blood must join with ours, Eclipse-born. Not in mere oath-taking, but in the old way, the way of sharing sight." Astrid stepped forward, concerned, but Sigurd raised a hand to stay her. "The blood-sharing ritual, that hasn't been performed in generations," Ulfr finished, "because none have been worthy, none have truly understood the balance." His eye gleamed. "Until now." The ritual was swift but powerful. Blood was shared, ancient words spoken, and for a moment Sigurd saw through the eyes of every warrior in the hall. More importantly, they saw through his, experienced firsthand the delicate balance he maintained between shadow and light, understood the truth of his purpose. When it was done, Ulfr himself took down the banner and presented it to Sigurd. The moment his hands touched the ancient fabric, the runes blazed to life, recognizing a power that echoed their own dual nature. "The Wolf Clan stands with you, Eclipse-born," Ulfr declared, his voice carrying the weight of oath-making. "Our axes, our wisdom, our blood, all are yours in the coming storm." He smiled grimly. "And storms are certainly coming. Already the ravens gather and the world tree shivers." Sigurd raised the banner, and every warrior in the hall drew their weapons in salute. The wolf's head seemed to move in the firelight, its eyes reflecting the same ancient knowledge he had seen in Ulfr's gaze. "Let them come," he said softly, feeling the power of his birthright thrumming through the ring, the dagger, and now the banner. "We will show them that the old ways are not dead, that true strength lies not in rejecting the darkness, but in learning to walk its paths without losing sight of the light." The wolves outside the hall began to howl, their voices rising in harmony with ancient powers stirring once more in the north. The hunt was gathering, and this time the shadows themselves would run with the wolves. The feast hall of Jarl Eriksson blazed with torchlight, but shadows still found places to dance. Sigurd sat at the high table, the Wolf Clan banner displayed. Prominently behind him, watching as servants brought forth the ceremonial drinking horn. 3 jarls had gathered to hear his claim, and ancient custom demanded they share mead before speaking of alliances. But something was wrong. The shadows whispered urgently, and the dwarf-forged dagger at his belt hummed in warning. Through the power of the family ring, he sensed a wrongness in the mead being poured, a darkness that had nothing to do with his own powers. The servant approached with an ornate silver chalice, its surface etched with scenes of the gods' great deeds. Even as the man bowed to offer it, Sigurd caught the faintest tremor in his hands, the slightest aversion of eyes. "A toast," declared Jarl Eriksson, raising his own horn, "to old bloodlines renewed." Sigurd lifted the chalice, pretending not to notice how the other jarls watched him with too keen interest. Instead, he studied the liquid's surface, where the torchlight created patterns that reminded him of Gunnlod's water scrying. The poison was clear and subtle. He would never have detected it without his gifts. "Indeed," he said smoothly, "to bloodlines." Then with deliberate care, he turned to the servant who had brought the chalice. "You seem thirsty, friend. Please, share this drink with me." The man went pale. Behind him, one of the visiting jarls, Bjornsson of the southern holds, half rose. From his seat, hand dropping to his sword, the shadows in the hall grew darker, more alert. "My lord," the servant stammered, "I couldn't possibly—" "I insist." Sigurd's voice carried an edge of steel beneath its courtesy. After all, what better way to honor old bloodlines than to break down the barriers between them? His eyes met Jarl Eriksson's. "Unless there's some reason he shouldn't drink from this particular chalice?" Silence fell heavy as a winter snow. Astrid's hand rested casual but ready on her sword hilt. Among the watching warriors, the Wolf Clan members had shifted subtly, positioning themselves for combat. Then Eriksson laughed, the sound sharp as breaking ice. "Well played, Eclipse-born." He waved the servant away and stood, towering over the feast table. "Though I wonder, was it your shadows that warned you, or simple paranoia?" "Perhaps it was honor," Sigurd replied, letting the chalice's contents spill across the table. The liquid sizzled slightly where it touched the wood. The honor your father once showed mine, before fear turned allies into enemies." "Fear?" Bjornsson spat the word. "Your very existence is an offense to the gods. Hrothgar was right to what?" Sigurd's voice cracked like thunder, and now the shadows rose around him like great wings. The family ring blazed on his finger, its starstone bright as a challenge. To cast out his own blood? To imprison his wife? To hide my sister's existence because he fears power he cannot control? He stood slowly, and the air itself seemed to thicken with potential violence. But when he spoke again, his voice was calm, controlled. "Look at your poisoned chalice, Jarls of the North. Look well, for it shows the rot that has crept into our land since the old ways were abandoned." With a gesture, he commanded the shadows to lift the chalice, to pass it from hand to hand among the gathered lords. They watched, some with fear, others with growing wonder as the vessel moved through the air like a leaf on the wind. "I could kill you all right now," Sigurd continued conversationally. "The shadows hunger for it. You can feel them, can't you? But that is not why I came." The chalice settled gently before Eriksson. "I came to rebuild, not destroy, to remind you of who we once were before fear divided us." Pretty words," Eriksson growled, "but words mean little against prophecy. The skalds speak of doom. The skalds speak of choice." Astrid cut in, her voice sharp with authority, "of a power that could save or damn, depending on how it is." Emet. She stood beside Sigurd, proud and fierce as any jarl. "Your fathers understood this. They knew that true strength lies in facing the unknown with courage, not cowering from it in fear." A murmur ran through the hall. The third jarl, who had remained silent until now, stood slowly. Eric Frosteye, they called him, oldest of the northern lords and keeper of the ancient records. "I remember," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "I remember when the jarldoms stood united, when we faced our challenges with wisdom instead of fear." His pale eyes fixed on Sigurd. "Show us, Eclipse-born. Show us what you would build upon the ruins of Hrothgar's paranoia." Sigurd raised his hand, and shadows swept the poisoned chalice away, replacing it with images that danced in the air. Visions of united lands, of strength renewed, of old magic working in harmony with new ways. The family ring pulsed in time with his heartbeat, connecting him to the bloodline that had once ruled these lands with wisdom and honor. "I would build a future," he said simply, "where we no longer need to poison chalices to test each other's worth." The seer's hut stood apart from the Wolf Clan settlement, perched on stilts above a misty pool where the veil between worlds ran thin. Ulfa had insisted they come here before advancing their plans further. "The old mother sees true," he'd said, "when others see only shadows of what might be." As Sigurd climbed the worn steps, the family ring grew warm on his finger, responding to ancient magics that dwelt here. Astrid followed close behind, her hand never far from her sword. Even the ravens, watching from nearby trees, seemed unusually silent. Inside, the air was thick with herb smoke and prophecy. The old mother sat surrounded by bones and runes, her blind eyes fixed on something far beyond the physical world. In her lap lay a crystal the size of a child's fist, its surface clouded until it caught the light just so. Then it seemed to hold entire worlds within its depths. "Eclipse-born," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves in autumn wind. "And Shadowwalker, and Dragon Friend yet to be, the threads of your word tangle many fates." Her hands moved over the crystal, which began to glow with an inner light. "Come, see what must be seen." Sigurd knelt before her, and she pressed the crystal into his hands. The moment his fingers touched its surface, visions exploded behind his eyes. He saw the great hall of his father, but changed. Shadows writhed along its walls like living things, and at the high seat sat a figure that was both himself and not himself, crowned in darkness and light. Before the throne knelt warriors bearing the banners of all the northern jarldoms, united at last. But the vision shifted, darkened. The world tree trembled, its roots racked by poison serpents. Giants marched from the realms of eternal ice, and the Midgard serpent stirred in its ocean bed. Fenris Wolf tested his chains, and they held, but only barely. The twilight comes, the old mother's voice echoed in his mind, but its shape is not yet fixed. Look deeper. The crystal pulsed, and now he saw his sister, so like him, yet marked by different gifts. She stood in a tower room, weaving dreams into reality, fighting to maintain her sanity as visions overwhelmed her. Their mother sat nearby, aged but unbroken, singing the ancient songs of power. The dream walker weakens, the seer continued. Her gift turns inward, consuming her as it consumed your grandmother. Without balance, without her other half, she cannot hold back the darkness much longer. The vision changed again. Now he saw himself standing at a crossroads, literal and metaphorical. One path led to power absolute, command over shadow and light both, but at the cost of something essential, something human. The other path promised balance, harmony, but required a sacrifice he couldn't yet understand. Your father fears what he cannot control, the old mother said, her physical voice joining with her mental one. But in trying to prevent doom, he hastens it. The walls between worlds thin, the old enemies gather. And you, she reached out with gnarled fingers to touch his face. You must choose, and choose rightly, or all the 9 worlds will pay the price. The crystal's light faded, but its warmth remained, pulsing in time with both his heartbeat. And something larger, the rhythm of the world tree itself perhaps. The old mother pressed it into his hands. Take it, she said. It has waited for one who can see both sides of twilight. Let it guide you when the shadows deepen and choices become unclear. What must I do? Sigurd asked, though part of him already knew. Unite what was divided, heal what was broken, find your other half before the eclipse returns. Her blind eyes seemed to see straight through him, but beware. Power calls to power, and not all who offer aid seek the same end as you. Trust your blood, trust your shadows, but most of all, trust the balance that dwells in your heart. She turned her face toward Astrid. The time comes, shieldmaiden, when you must let him walk his path alone. Your protection has forged him well, but some battles cannot be fought by proxy. Astrid's face showed pain, but also acceptance. I know. 3 paths lie before you, Eclipse-born, the old mother continued. The path of power, which leads to victory, but also to darkness absolute. The path of denial, which leads to safety, but dooms all you love. And the middle path, the wolf's path, which demands the most terrible price, but offers the greatest hope. She smiled, an expression both gentle and terrible. Choose wisely, for you choose not only for yourself, but for all the 9 worlds. The crystal in his hands pulsed once more, showing him a final vision. The next eclipse approaching, darkness and light in perfect balance, and a moment of choice that would echo through eternity. When the vision faded, the old mother was already turning away, her part in this great working complete. Outside, the ravens took wing, carrying news of what had transpired to their master. The time of hiding, of preparation was over. Now began the time of action, and of choices that could not be unmade. Dawn broke over the gathering of forces, with a blood-red sky that reminded too many of the eclipse that had started everything. 5 jarls had pledged their support now, their banners snapping in the winter wind alongside the Wolf Clan's standard. Warriors numbering in the hundreds prepared for war, their weapons glinting like ice in the early light. Sigurd stood atop a ridge overlooking the assembly, the seer's crystal hanging at his belt, opposite the dwarf-forged dagger. Both artifacts pulsed with power, responding to the energies building in the air. Beside him, Ulfr held an ancient war, horn carved from the tusk of some legendary beast, its surface covered in runes that spiraled from mouthpiece to bell. "The horn of the first winter," the wolf clan chief explained, his one eye gleaming. "Blown when the first frost giants attacked our ancestors, its call can be heard across all the northern jarldoms. More importantly, it awakens something in the blood of those who hear it, a memory of ancient oaths and older powers." "And you think it will help rally more to our cause?" Sigurd asked, watching as more warriors arrived in small groups, drawn by word of his growing army. "It will remind them of who they truly are," Ulfr replied. "When Hrothgar turned from the old ways, he didn't just reject magic, he rejected our very identity. The horn's call will speak to that forgotten part of them." Below, Astrid moved among the gathered forces, organizing them into fighting units that mixed warriors from different clans. Smart, Sigurd thought. It would force them to work together, to trust each other despite generations of rivalry. The family ring warmed suddenly on his finger, and he turned to see Eric Frosteye approaching, his ancient frame supported by a staff of white wood. "The ravens bring news," the old Jarl said without preamble. "Hrothgar knows we gather. He sends forces to stop us before we can fully unite." "How many?" Ulfr demanded. 3,000 warriors, led by his personal guard of berserkers. They march beneath the crown's banner, claiming all who stand with the Eclipse-born are traitors to the north itself. Sigurd felt the shadows stir around him, eager for battle, but he kept them in check. The dagger's song reminded him of balance, of the need to think beyond mere victory or defeat. How many would stand with us if they knew the truth, he wondered aloud. If they knew about my sister, about my mother, about the real prophecy. "Then let them know," Ulfr said and held out the horn. "Let them hear it in the voice of their own history." Sigurd took the horn carefully. The moment his hands touched it, the runes began to glow with the same light that filled the seers. Crystal power recognized power, and ancient magic stirred in response to his blood. He raised the horn to his lips and blew. The sound that emerged was like nothing any of them had ever heard, deep as glacier-carved fjords, wild as storm winds, yet carrying notes of something older still. It echoed off mountains and rolled across valleys, and where it passed, people stopped to listen. The very shadows seemed to pause in their dance. But more than the sound, it carried meaning. Those who heard it remembered stories told by grandparents on long winter nights, remembered the days when magic walked openly in the world, when their people stood united against threats that would have destroyed them separately. The effect on the gathered army was immediate. Warriors stood straighter, gripped weapons with new purpose. Those who had been hesitant found their resolve strengthened. And in the distance more horns answered, smaller horns, hunting horns, but their meaning was clear. "We hear, we remember, we come." "Look," Eric Frosteye whispered. Along the horizon, more banners appeared. Small groups became larger ones as scattered forces united. Riders appeared on distant ridges, their weapons raised in salute. The horn's call had awakened something that Hrothgar's fear could not touch, pride in who they were, in all their history, both dark and light. "They come," Ulfr said, satisfaction heavy in his voice. "They choose the old ways. They choose hope," Sigurd corrected, watching as his forces nearly doubled in size. The ring on his finger pulsed with each new arrival, recognizing the blood of the north in their veins. They choose balance over fear. The shadows around him had calmed, no longer hungry for battle, but ready to serve a greater purpose. Through the seer's crystal, he caught glimpses of other gatherings. His father's forces advancing, yes, but also his sister in her tower room, head raised as if hearing the horn's call in her dreams. Soon, he knew, soon they would be united. "Send riders to guide the new arrivals," he commanded. "Send scouts to watch Hrothgar's advance, and send word to every settlement between here and the Crown City. The Eclipse-born returns not to destroy, but to restore. Not to conquer, but to heal." The war horn's final note faded into legend, but its effect remained. The army that gathered now was more than just warriors preparing for battle. They were the North itself, awakening to its true nature, remembering that the greatest strength comes not from rejecting the darkness, but from learning to walk in both shadow and light. The storm was gathering, yes, but storms could bring destruction or needed change. The choice, as always, would come down to balance. The crown city rose before them like a mountain of timber and stone, its walls lined with Hrothgar's warriors. But it was the sky that commanded all attention. The sun's edge had already begun to darken, the first bite of eclipse visible to all. In the treasury tower, hidden behind layers of guards and ancient wards, sat the eclipse crown of the North, an artifact of power that had remained unworn since the first kings united the Jarldoms. Sigurd felt its pull even from here, resonating with his blood through the family ring. The seer's crystal at his belt showed him visions of it, a circle of black iron and white gold intertwined, set with stones that drank both shadow and light. A crown meant for one who could walk between worlds. "The eclipse begins," Astrid said softly beside him, "just as you began." Around them, the army that had followed the horn's call made ready for battle, but Sigurd raised his hand, and they stilled. The shadows gathered around him, not like weapons now, but like a cloak of authority. "Once more," he called out, his voice carrying to every warrior. "Once more we offer peace before war. Let me enter alone. Let me speak with my father, my mother, my sister. Let me show him there is nothing to fear from balance." For a long moment, silence held, then movement on the walls, a figure in rich furs approaching the battlements. Hrothgar himself, looking older than Sigurd had expected, his beard more grey than gold. "Now, you speak of peace while gathering an army?" His father's voice boomed out. "You speak of balance while commanding shadows?" "I speak of truth," Sigurd replied. The family ring blazed on his finger, recognizing blood calling to blood. "The truth you've hidden about my sister, about the real prophecy, about your own fear." He saw his father flinch at the mention of his sister, saw warriors on the wall exchange uncertain looks. The seeds of doubt had been planted long before this moment. Now they began to sprout. "Show them, father," Sigurd continued, gentler. "Now, show them how the eclipse crown glows in your treasury, waiting for one who can unite both sides of our nature. Show them how you've kept my mother and sister imprisoned, not for their safety, but for yours." More murmuring among the defenders. Hrothgar's face darkened like the sun above. "You know nothing of—" "I know everything." Sigurd held up the seer's crystal, and within its depths, images formed that all could see, the truth of that birth. Night, the hidden twin, the prophecy in its entirety. "The eclipse returns, father. What was divided must be united. What was broken must be healed." The air grew heavier as the eclipse progressed. Shadows lengthened across the snow, but instead of reaching for Sigurd as they usually did, they seemed to wait, watching. Even the ravens circling overhead fell silent. Then from the highest tower of the city, a woman's voice raised in song, an ancient melody that spoke of unity, of balance, of things lost and found again. His mother's voice, strong despite her years of confinement, and joining it, another voice, younger but carrying the same power, his sister, the dream walker, singing harmony to his shadow's melody. The effect was immediate. The eclipse crown, hidden in its treasury chamber, began to pulse with visible light that shone through walls of stone. The family ring answered it, and the seer's crystal filled with visions of what could be a united North, strong in both old ways and new, facing the coming darkness with wisdom instead of fear. "The time of choice is upon us," Sigurd called out, not just to his father now, but to all who listened. "The eclipse above us marks not an ending, but a transition, not a darkness to be feared, but a moment of perfect balance between light and shadow." He held out his hands, empty of weapons, but full of possibility. The dwarf-forged dagger hung quiet at his belt, its purpose not to threatening, but to remind. The war horn remained silent, its call for unity already sounded. "Let me enter," he said one final time. "Let us face this moment as family, not as enemies. Let us show the 9 worlds that the North remembers how to stand between light and shadow, how to walk both paths with wisdom." Above them, the eclipse continued its steady progress. The crown's light pulsed stronger with each passing moment, and the song from the tower grew clearer, calling to something deep in the blood of all who heard it. The time of prophecy was upon them, and all the North held its breath, waiting to see what choice would be made. The shadows gathered close, not as weapons, but as witnesses. The moment of truth approached with the inevitability of the eclipse itself. The city gates opened, but not in welcome. Hrothgar's berserkers poured forth, like a tide of iron and fury, their battle madness enhanced by dark magic that made Sigurd's shadows recoil. Behind them came regular warriors, men and women who looked uncertain even as they advanced under the crown's banner. But it was what emerged last that made Sigurd's heart clench. A tall figure in black armor, wielding a sword that seemed to drink the eclipse light itself, the blade known as Skigga Shadow Cleaver, forged specifically to counter magic like his. "Your uncle Bjorn," Astrid whispered, pain in her voice. "I wondered if Hrothgar would send him." Before Sigurd could respond, the air split with his uncle's battlefield voice. "The eclipse-born dies today, for the North, for the light." The irony of fighting for light under a darkening sun wasn't lost on anyone, but there was no time for reflection. Battle erupted with the fury of a winter storm, steel meeting steel beneath the strange half-light of the advancing eclipse. Sigurd raised the dwarf-forged dagger, its song rising to meet Skigga's hollow roar. But he knew it wouldn't be enough. The dagger was a tool of balance, not a weapon of war. As if in answer to this thought, a horn blast cut through the chaos. Through the melee rode Gunnlod, the dwarf smith herself, mounted on a warhorse, whose hooves struck sparks from the frozen ground. In her hands she held a sword that blazed with both shadow and light, a blade that could answer Skigga's challenge. "The sword, Twilight," she called, tossing it to him with unerring accuracy. "Forged for this moment, from the same star metal as your mother's ring. Let it show you the way." The weapon seemed to leap into his grip, its perfect balance and extension of his own nature. Where the dagger sang of choice, Twilight sang of action. Shadow and light swirled along its length, neither dominating, both serving. His uncle charged, Skigga raised high. "You're an abomination," he roared. "A mistake that should have been corrected at birth." Their blades met with a sound like the world cracking. Skigga's darkness tried to devour Twilight's light, but found itself matched by the sword's shadows. Neither weapon could overcome the other, just as neither light nor shadow could exist without its opposite. "Look around you," Sigurd called as they fought. "Look at what fear of darkness has brought us. Division, mistrust, weakness when we should be strong." Around them, the battle raged with similar uncertainty. The Wolf Clan warriors fought with disciplined fury, while Hrothgar's forces seemed increasingly hesitant. Above, the eclipse continued its inexorable advance, and with it came a change in the very air, a thinning of the boundaries between worlds. Through the seer's crystal's power, Sigurd caught glimpses of other battles being fought. In the tower, his sister wove dreams that protected their mother from shadow assassins. In Asgard itself, Odin watched with his ravens, knowing this clash would determine far more than the fate of the northern kingdoms. "Enough!" Sigurd roared, and the shadows responded, not attacking, but revealing. Everyone on the battlefield saw visions of what was coming. The Midgard serpent stirring, Fenris straining at his chains, frost giants gathering at the world's edges. "The true enemy approaches, and we waste our strength fighting each other." His uncle faltered, Skigga's dark hunger dimming as truth pierced battle rage. More and more warriors stopped fighting, looking up at the eclipse, feeling ancient power, awakening in their blood. Then, from the highest tower, a new sound emerged, his sister's voice raised in a song of power that made dreams manifest. Those who heard it saw the truth of the prophecy. Not a darkness to be feared, but a balance to be achieved. Not an ending, but a transformation. The Eclipse crown flared in its chamber, responding to the combined power of the twins. The family ring blazed on Sigurd's finger, and twilight shone like a star in his hands. This was the moment the old mother had foreseen, the chance to choose a different path. "Uncle," he said softly, lowering his blade, "the darkness you fear is not in me. It's in the division that weakens us, in the denial of our own nature. Every dawn needs its dusk, every summer needs its winter, every light needs its shadow." Bjorn stood frozen, Skygga's blade trembling in his grip. Around them, warriors of both sides waited, sensing the importance of this moment. Above, the eclipse neared totality, and the boundaries between worlds grew thinner still. "Choose," Sigurd said, echoing Odin's words to him in that first vision. "Not between light and shadow, but for balance, for strength, for the future." Slowly, like ice breaking in spring, his uncle lowered Skygga. The sword's dark hunger faded, revealing it as just steel, deadly, but no longer imbued with fear's power to corrupt. "The prophecy," Bjorn whispered. "We thought it spoke of doom, but it spoke of choice," Sigurd finished. "And now all the North must choose. The real battle approaches. Will we face it divided by fear or united in wisdom?" The eclipse above cast its strange light over them all, waiting for their answer. In the eclipse's totality, Sigurd climbed the tower steps with twilight sheathed at his side. The family ring pulsed stronger with each step, calling to its other half, the healing stone his sister had carried since birth, though neither of them had known its significance until now. He found her in the highest room, standing over there. Mother's sleeping form, Helga, his twin, his balance, turned to face him with eyes that held the same eclipse fire as his own. Between them, shadows and dreams danced together, recognizing their separate but complementary natures. "Brother," she said simply, and held out the healing stone. Its soft blue light contrasted with the ring's golden glow, creating a perfect harmony. "I've been dreaming of this moment since I first learned to dream." Their mother stirred, aged beyond her years by confinement, but still beautiful, still strong. The songs of power she had sung during the battle had taken their toll, but her smile was radiant as she looked upon her children, united at last. "The price must still be paid," she whispered, her voice rough from years of singing ancient protections. "Power always demands its due." As if in answer, pain lanced through Sigurd's body. He felt Helga gasp beside him, experiencing the same sensation. The powers they had wielded during the battle, shadow and dream, darkness and light, demanded balance. The healing stone pulsed between them, offering a way forward but not an easy one. "I understand now," Helga said, taking his hand. The stone's light spread to encompass them both. "Why we were separated. Together our power is too great to contain. It must be distributed, balanced." Through the stone's power, Sigurd saw what she meant. The eclipse above was more than just a celestial event. It was a moment when power could be redistributed, when the very fabric of reality could be rewoven. But such workings carried a terrible cost. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we'll never be able to use our full powers again. The shadows, the dreams," she echoed, understanding. "They'll still be there, but diminished," their mother. "Finished, spread out among the bloodline, as they were always meant to be. No one person was ever supposed to hold such power alone." That's what the prophecy truly meant, not choosing between light and shadow, but choosing to share both. Outside, they could hear the aftermath of battle. Warriors helping former enemies, healing songs being sung, old grievances being set aside in the face of greater truth. The Wolf Clan's banner flew alongside the crowns, and Uncle Bjorn's voice rose strong, calling for unity. The healing stone grew warmer between them. Through its power, they could see the threads of fate stretching out before them, the coming battles against ancient enemies, the need for a united North, the importance of maintaining balance between old ways and new. "Together, then," Helga said, gripping his hand tighter. Their mother placed her hands over theirs, adding her own power to the working. The stone's light exploded outward, mixing with the ring's glow. Sigurd felt his connection to the shadows shift, not severing, but transforming. Where before they had been a torrent of power rushing through him, now they became a gentle stream, manageable, controlled. Helga's dream power underwent a similar transformation. The visions that had threatened to overwhelm her settled into something softer, more sustainable. Their combined power flowed out through their blood connection too. Every member of the northern kingdoms, gifting each with a small measure of both shadow and light, dream and reality. The price of power was being paid, not in blood or pain, but in sacrifice freely chosen. The healing stone grew dark as it completed its work, having fulfilled its purpose. But the family ring continued to glow, now a symbol not of concentrated a power, but of unified purpose. When it was done, Sigurd felt both less and more than he had been. The shadows still responded to his call, but gently now, like old friends rather than eager servants. Helga's eyes were clearer than he'd ever seen them, freed from the burden of too much seeing. "It is finished," their mother said softly, "and it is just beginning." She was right. Through the tower window, they could see the eclipse ending. Light returning to the world, but it was different now, softer, more balanced. The north would never again reject either light or shadow, but would walk the path between them, as it was always meant to. The healing stone lay quiet between them, its great work complete, but its lesson would live on. True power lies not in hoarding strength, but in sharing it. Not in standing alone, but in standing together. Not in choosing one path, but in learning to walk them all. The great hall of Hrothgar had been transformed. Where once shadows lurked in corners, now they danced openly with light, creating patterns that celebrated both day and night. The eclipse. Crown sat on a pedestal between two thrones, one for Sigurd, one for Helga, but it was not yet time for it to be worn. First, unity had to be proven, not just declared. Before the gathered jarls and clan chiefs, Gunnlod and her fellow dwarves worked ancient magic, weaving a new banner for a renewed north. Gold and silver threads merged with deepest black and brightest white, forming an image of the world tree Yggdrasil. But this version showed both its sun-dappled branches and deep-shadowed roots, acknowledging the necessity of both. "The United Realm Banner," the dwarfsmith announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Bound with threads from all 9 worlds, blessed by both Aesir and Vanir. Let it fly only when all stand together, or let it fall to remind us of our oaths." Hrothgar stood beneath it, his proud shoulders finally bowed, not by defeat, but by understanding. The battle had changed him, changed them all. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I was wrong," he said simply. "In fearing what I did not understand, I nearly destroyed everything I sought to protect." He turned to his children, his eyes clear of their old fear. "The prophecy spoke true, but I heard only what my fear allowed me to hear." Sigurd and Helga, descended from their thrones, the family ring and healing stone now fashioned into matching circlets that crowned them both. Their power, though diminished, flowed more smoothly now that it was shared, balanced between them and spread throughout the bloodline. "The North accepts both shadow and light," Sigurd declared, his voice carrying the authority of one who had walked both paths, as it always should have. "The North remembers its dreams," Helga added, her once overwhelming visions now turned to wisdom's service, both dark and bright. Together they grasped the United Realm banner, lifting it high. As they did, every warrior in the hall drew their weapons, not to fight, but to swear allegiance. The Wolf Clan's banner dipped in respect, soon followed by the standards of every major house and clan. Uncle Bjorn stepped forward, Skigga now reforged and cleansed of its shadow-hunting magic. "The Berserkers swear to serve balance," he declared. "To fight not against darkness, but against chaos. Not against change, but against destruction." One by one, the Jarls came forward to swear their oaths. But these were not mere pledges of fealty to new rulers. Each oath was unique, acknowledging the special gifts and responsibilities that the sharing of power had granted their bloodlines. The banner seemed to glow as each oath was sworn, its threads catching both firelight and shadow. Through the seers' crystal, which now hung publicly in the hall for all to consult, they could see the impact of their choices rippling through the 9 worlds. The giants paused in their advance. The Midgard serpent settled back into slumber. Fenris's chains held strong, reinforced by renewed belief in balance rather than dominance. Their mother, restored to her rightful place as queen, led the skalds in songs that would preserve this moment in memory. But these were new songs, celebrating the strength found in unity rather than the glory of conquest. The eclipse marked a beginning, not an end, she sang, her voice strong and clear. The Shadow Walker and Dreamweaver, divided by fear, united by wisdom, let their choice light our path through the coming darkness. Astrid stood at her post, still commanding the royal guards, but now those guards were drawn from all clans, all backgrounds. She caught Sigurd's eye and smiled, the proud smile of a teacher whose student had exceeded all expectations. The united realm banner rippled in a wind that touched nothing else, its magic settling into the very stones of the hall. This was more than just a symbol, it was a pact with reality itself. As long as the North remembered the lesson of balance, as long as they walked the path between extremes, they would stand strong against whatever darkness gathered at the world's edges. Let it be known, Sigurd and Helga spoke together, their voices harmonizing like shadow and light, that the North is whole again, not through conquest, but through understanding, not through fear, but through wisdom. The banner fluttered one final time, then hung still, a constant reminder of oaths sworn and truths learned. The eclipse had ended, but its lesson would remain. True strength lies not in rejecting what we fear, but in learning to walk between all extremes, carrying both light and shadow in our hearts. Outside, ravens called the news to the 9 worlds. The North had chosen balance, and in doing so had changed the very weave of fate itself. In the quiet of the restored archive chamber, Sigurd watched as the old skald carefully unrolled a pristine scroll of vellum. This was no ordinary recording of events. The Elder Scroll, as it had come to be known, was crafted from the hide of a magical beast, treated with oils from all 9 worlds, and inscribed with inks that shifted like living shadows. The story must be preserved, the skald said, his weathered hands steady as he dipped his pen in ink that gleamed like starlight. Not just the battles and victories, but the wisdom earned. Future generations must understand the price of fear and the power of balance. Helga sat nearby, her dreams now controlled enough to let her witness the writing without being overwhelmed by visions of all possible versions. Their mother stood at the window, singing softly, not songs of power now, but gentle melodies that helped the ink settle into proper patterns. The skald began to write, and the words seemed to choose themselves. In the time of the great eclipse, when shadow and light danced as equals across the northern sky, the people of the fjords and forests learned that strength flows not from rejection of what we fear, but from understanding of what we are. All of us carry both darkness and light, dream and reality, courage and fear. The true path lies not in choosing between them, but in learning to walk with both as companions. The ink shifted colors as it dried, sometimes catching the light, like gold, sometimes deep as a starless night. Sigurd watched his own story take shape on the magical parchment, but it was different from the tales of mere victory or defeat that filled the other scrolls in the archive. The eclipse-born twins, the skald continued writing, taught us that power divided becomes power multiplied, that gifts hoarded become curses, while gifts shared become strengths. Their choice to distribute their powers through the bloodlines of the North did not weaken them but made the entire realm stronger. Helga moved closer, adding her own words. The dream paths show many futures, but all paths of wisdom share this truth, that balance must be maintained not through force, but through understanding. The berserkers learned to channel their rage into protection rather than destruction. The shadow warriors learned to illuminate truth rather than hide it. The dream walkers learned to guide rather than control. Their mother's song shifted, and the ink responded, forming images alongside the words. The united realm banner flying above unified armies, the eclipse crown waiting for the day it would be needed again, the healing stone's power spreading through generations. Let it be known, Sigurd dictated, watching as his words took form in living ink, that the North chose a different path. When darkness gathered at the world's edges, when ancient enemies stirred in their slumber, we did not meet their threat with fear. We met it with wisdom, with unity, with the strength that comes from accepting all aspects of our nature. The skald's hand moved steadily across the parchment, recording not just events, but their deeper meaning. This was more than history. It was wisdom distilled, truth crystallized, lessons paid for in sacrifice and understanding. The prophecy spoke true, the words continued, but like all true things, its meaning lay deeper than the surface. The eclipse marked not an ending but a transformation, not a curse but an opportunity. In choosing balance over dominance, wisdom over fear, unity over division, the North did more than save itself. It showed a path that all the 9 worlds might follow. As the final words took shape, the Elder Scroll seemed to pulse with its own inner light. This was magic of a different sort, not the raw power of shadow and dream that Sigurd and Helga had once wielded, but the deeper magic of truth recognized and wisdom earned. And so we set down this tale, the skald wrote in conclusion, not to glorify individuals or celebrate victories, but to remind all who read it that the greatest battles are fought not with swords, but with understanding, that the darkest shadows and brightest lights are both needed to see truly, that strength lies not in standing alone, but in standing together. The ink dried, catching both light and shadow in its depths. The Elder Scroll would be copied, its wisdom shared throughout the 9 worlds, but this original would remain in the North, a testament to lessons learned and choices made. The eclipse returns in cycles, Helga said softly, touching the words that told their tale, and with each return, these truths must be remembered. They will be, their mother assured her, as long as there are those willing to walk the path between extremes, to carry both light and shadow in their hearts. The wisdom of the eclipse will never be forgotten. The scroll gleamed in the archive's quiet light, a beacon of understanding for generations yet to come. 1 full cycle of the moon had passed since the eclipse, when Grida's ancient form appeared once more at the gates of the great hall. In her gnarled hands, she carried something that caught both light and shadow. A new amulet forged from the remnants of all that had come before. The vulva had melted down the original bronze disc that had protected the infant Sigurd, mixing it with fragments from the berserker's broken axe, shavings from the dwarf-forged dagger, and a single crystal from the seer's stone. The resulting amulet held the story of their journey within its very substance. The wheel turns, Grida announced, as Sigurd and Helga welcomed her into the hall, where both shadow and light now danced freely. What was divided has been united. What was broken has been remade. But wisdom must be renewed with each generation, lest we forget the price of fear and the value of balance. The twins stood before her, their shared power now flowing smooth and controlled through the bloodlines of the North. Around them gathered the Jarls and clan chiefs, the Wolf Clan warriors and reformed berserkers, all wearing small tokens that showed the touch of both shadow and light in their blood. The eclipse marked your beginning, the vulva continued, holding up the amulet. Let this mark your continuation. The metal caught the light, revealing intricate patterns that shifted between darkness and brilliance. In it lies the memory of all that was, and the promise of all that may be. Hrothgar stepped forward, his face peaceful in a way it hadn't been since before the twins' birth. I feared the eclipse's power, he admitted, but I did not understand it. The darkness I feared was my own fear itself. As it so often is, Grida agreed. She turned to Astrid, who stood proud in her position as commander of the United Guards. You knew this truth when you saved him. You saw that darkness and light must both be preserved for either to have meaning. The shieldmaiden bowed her head. In acknowledgement, her hand resting on the sword that had once been used for division but now served unity. Grida raised the amulet high, and its power resonated with every artifact in the hall. The United Realm banner rippled, the Elder Scroll gleamed, and the Eclipse crown pulsed with recognition. "This is not an ending," she declared. "It is a link in an eternal chain, a reminder that each generation must find its own balance." Sigurd and Helga accepted the amulet together, their hands meeting around its warm metal. Through its power, they saw glimpses of what would come, challenges and choices that future generations would face, moments when the lesson of balance would need to be remembered. "The ravens still watch," Helga said softly, her dream sight now focused and clear. "The world tree still grows. The ancient enemies still gather, but now we face them not with fear, but with understanding. And not alone," Sigurd added, feeling the controlled strength of shadows at his call, but united in wisdom earned through trial. Their mother's voice rose in song, no longer needed for protection, but chosen for celebration. The skalds joined her, their words carrying the story to every corner of the north. But this was not a song of simple victory. It was a melody of balance found, of wisdom earned, of strength discovered in unity rather than division. The amulet pulsed once more, and in its depths they saw the truth of cycles, how endings become beginnings, how shadow defines light as surely as light defines shadow, how each generation must learn anew the wisdom that their ancestors paid for in blood and courage and choice. "The eclipse returns," Grida reminded them, her ancient eyes bright with knowing. "But now its coming brings not fear, but remembrance, not division, but renewal." Outside, ravens called their agreement, and the wolves of the north raised their voices in harmony. The sun shone bright and clear, its light playing across the fjords and forests of a united realm. But the shadows remained, welcome now, understood at last, as part of the great dance of existence. The new amulet found its place between the twin thrones, not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder of truth hard-won and wisdom dearly bought. The North had changed, and would change again, but some lessons would remain constant, that strength flows from unity, that wisdom comes from understanding, and that the truest path often lies between extremes. And so, the story of the Eclipse-born came full circle, not ending, but transforming, becoming part of the eternal cycle of light and shadow, wisdom and choice, ending and beginning again.